Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Tuesday, January 14th. Position preview season rolls along. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you. On this episode, we take a look at the second base position. We close out the middle infield. We started off the series on Monday, the previous episode in this feed, looking at shortstops. Tons of ground to cover again, and second base is one of those positions that's kind of backloaded by ADP, so a lot more conversation will happen lower in the pool for reasons that are basically how the playing time is distributed for a lot of teams. It's a shared position for some. It's not really a spot where you see a ton of prospects unless they're moving off shortstop or something because it's crowded. So interesting position to try and figure out, and a lot of ground to cover like always. Before we get into all of it, just a reminder, we will do the Hive rankings for this position as well. So if you're in our Discord, you'll see a link to fill those out. Submit your own rankings. We're going to compile all those to get a listener composite group that'll be open for probably about 2 weeks or so. So a lot of time to get those in, but the sooner the better. And as always, we use NFBC ADP to sort of structure the conversation, to give you an idea where these players have been going in drafts recently. You're right. Here we go. We're going right after it. Tier 1 at second base is literally one player. Ketel Marte is the only second baseman in the top 30 overall. You might remember at shortstop, we had 5 players, I believe, going in the first 2 rounds. I think the question is pretty simple. Like, is it worth paying the premium for Ketel Marte? If you look at the auction calculator and run a set of projections through there, I used a 15-team league. I ran the new Oopsie projections in there. There are 7 shortstops projected to be worth $20 or more using a $260 budget. There are no second basemen projected to be worth $20 or more. Ketel Marte comes in just under $18. So the highest ranked player at the position by those projections, falls a little short of top end players at other positions. We've seen this from him for a while in terms of core skills that looked like early round skills. He's just been riddled by a lot of injuries. And I think that's made trusting him even more complicated than it should be, especially coming off a year in which he just showed a career best barrel rate. And I think the power looks very real to me from Ketel Marte.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous about the injuries for Ketel Marte. If you look at the projections for him, Steamer has 669 plate appearances. That is a number that Ketel Marte has never hit.
Yeah.
Even the more restrained depth charts have him at 637, which is a number he's only hit once in 2023. And, the last 3 years, 558, 650, 583, you think, okay, maybe he's going to go down for a 15-day, but Ketel Marte will be mostly good. Well, in 2022, he played 137 games and wasn't good. So I think he was playing through injuries on some of that. And then the last 2 years, he's been great, but let's not forget 2021, where he had 374 plate appearances, or 2017, where he had 255 plate appearances. I mean, there have been years where he kind of like almost missed the whole year. And so it makes me nervous. I don't think that the legs will be there that much anymore. Asking for him to repeat a career year, I think, is asking for a lot. So he's going to regress. He's not going to give you much in speed, and the hamstrings. He's 31. They could go, and he could be out for more than 15 days. So I don't know. Ketel Marte is not a name I'd circle, and I think it's important because, as you'll notice from the rest of our conversation about second base, like you'll have 2 paths in the wood, which is get a good one because there aren't that many good ones, or just get a guy near the end that is good enough. And I'm kind of being pushed towards the get a guy because I don't want to get the first guy.
Right. There's a flat spot a little bit later on where there's a bunch of $8 to $12 players, and they're scattered pretty far into your draft. So you can just wait it out and kind of wait until you're down to like 2 or 3 of them and choose the one you like the best. And I think that's a fine overall approach, and you can get away with that. If Ketel Marte were to fall around, it happens once in a while. If he becomes a 3rd rounder, there's probably a case for him there. But I think at full price, when you're looking at him alongside of Trey Turner, You're looking at him just after Jazz Chisholm. You're looking at him after Jackson Merrill. You're looking at him right around Ronald Acuna Jr., even coming off the second ACL tear, or Austin Riley, or Rafael Devers, or Matt Olson. Like, I just feel
Devers, dude,
better about that.
Give me Devers.
Right. You can go younger with more ceiling, and you can go more established with better health track records right around him. I think that's the thing that's working against him.
A lot of those guys that you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think a really nice all-around player, but one that the market has bumped up, probably in part because of the scarcity at the position. I don't want to pay the premium in this instance because there are plenty of other players that I like a little bit more. Tier 2 is interesting, though. If you don't want to go full Eno and go all the way down to the get a guy later, you do have some interesting options here. Jose Altuve lives in this pick 50, 60, 70 range, most drafts. Ozzie Albies is right there with him. Marcus Semien and Jordan Westburg are also inside the top 100 in pretty much every draft that you're going to see. So this group of 4 brings quite a bit to the table. They're the other early rounders. They're the other guys that are foundational pieces. We'll start with Altuve. Do you think that the spike in chase rate, O-swing percentage, that we saw last year, up to 39.6%, was a career high other than his debut all the way back in 2011, is that a big warning sign for Altuve, that we're finally hitting that point in his career where he's just not that guy anymore? And maybe there's a little more batting average risk starting to creep into this profile, even though he seems to get as much out of his skills as just about any player in the game at this stage of his career.
Yeah, I mean, he's, I think, a future Hall of Famer, but at 34 years old, you're just worried. I mean, the last time he missed significant time, Jose Altuve, was actually the broken hand from the WBC, right?
Yeah, from the WBC? Yeah, it's 90 games in 2023. I think that would have been it.
Yeah, I think there was a broken hand of the WBC. So it hasn't been hamstrings. It hasn't been the back. He's still projected so nicely. I mean, basically a plus batting average 2020 guy. It just makes me nervous, man. This makes me nervous. I could take him though. It's what's his ADP? What's he up against?
The Altuve toss-ups, cross position. I mean, pick 60 is about where he goes last 14 days. You're looking at Pete Alonso. You're looking at Adley Rutschman. You got another guy at his position we'll get to in a minute, Ozzie Albies, much younger as your positional comp. If you want to be a little more aggressive in terms of a young player, you could maybe get Wyatt Langford or James Wood in that range. So it's more of a build-specific thing at that point. If you've got a little more risk, a slightly younger core, and you say, I kind of want the safer floor sort of projection, and I don't want to get caught in the fray playing the weighted second base game, I like Altuve. Like that's probably a good case.
If you're a projections believer, categorically he's like the best pick there, even among all the people you've said, because you get a top second baseman and you get one that does everything.
Yeah, that would be the best case for him. I think the thing I would want to see if I was going to take Altuve there is Albies off the board already. I think if I'm choosing between the two, I like Ozzie Albies more. We're talking about a guy that's only a year removed from popping 30 homers for the second time in his career. He just turned 28, so it doesn't feel like we're in that possible cliff phase where the mileage is catching up to him. It was a fractured wrist and a fractured toe last year, kind of a combination of significant bad luck injuries. I do think there is an occupational hazard of sorts that comes with being a core player in Atlanta right now, where you just play every single day. We love it from the volume perspective. It can lead you to the top end of the player pool if you manage to stay healthy for all of it. But I do think it's added risk that comes along with it. But all things considered, I look at Ozzie Albies and think, if I'm choosing between him and Altuve, I'll take my chance on the much younger player here. I think there's also, for me, more confidence in the overall quality of Atlanta's lineup, having just better injury luck as a group this year. It wasn't just Albies that missed time last year. So there might just be a collective bounce back across the board that makes those counting stats a bit better from Albies, even though I think what you said about Altuve, like a 2020 projection with a good average, there's not much to pull apart there. Like, that's a really solid projection. I still think you're looking at a better ceiling for Albies with a pretty similar floor.
Yeah. I mean, that's where I agree with you on the build. maybe it is nice that the Braves didn't have a long postseason run.
A little bit of rest for a bunch of guys that have been played a ton in the last couple of seasons. Yeah, it's a possible silver lining.
I think Semien is similar to Altuve in that if you cover the age portion of the projection, you'd be like, oh, I might consider him even over Albies, 254, 24, 12. Like that's probably going to be, very close to Albies. I mean, in terms of projections, they're very similar. But you have to incorporate the age. So Semien goes after Albies, and I have no question about it. But he's like the biggest volume play there is, Semien. And, we're always chasing plate appearances. So why not get the guy who has, for 4 straight years, and actually, if you take 2020 out, 6 straight seasons has ended the season with a plate appearance total that starts with a 7.
Yes, I mean that's elite durability at a time when the game is just a physical grind. To be able to do that 6 consecutive full seasons, it's remarkable. It's the kind of thing that you always want to have on your roster, but it becomes increasingly difficult to trust it the further into your career you go.
Yeah. It's really rough.
It can happen. It can happen because they don't have anyone pushing him for playing time. He's still in the middle of a 7-year, $175 million deal. There's 4 years left on Marcus Semien's deal. So if he's healthy, he will play and make another run at extending that streak. That's possible. The stolen bases
I wonder if he's
down.
doing some bat speed training. Look at his max CV. It's going up.
It's pretty interesting that'd be going up in your mid-30s. But yeah, it's a way of trying to maintain power you had when you were younger. I think what we saw last year seems like a skills-based floor. If you said he's going to get 700 plate appearances again, I'd be very surprised if the average and the pop and the speed went down from where it is. If he played that much and hit 230 something again with 18 homers and 8 or less stolen bases, wouldn't that be kind of a weird outcome? Because a lot of the underlying numbers for Semien are still right in line with his career norms. I don't see rapid erosion in the underlying power numbers. The barrel rate still right around 6%. It's been there 3 years in a row. Hard hit rate for his career, 34.8%. Last year, 35.2%. He still looks like he has a lot of those foundational skills in place.
But isn't it? Sometimes I look at a player's, career, especially ones that have been played this long, and you can almost see the bell curve. It's kind of amazing. Marcus Semien's first year, full year, first year where he got a big chance was in Chicago White Sox, 2014, 255 plate appearances. His slash line that year was 234, 300, 372. His slash line last year was 237, 308, 391. And in between, oh man, you got some nice peak years.
Yeah, look at the strikeout rate, though. If you had told me back in 2014 that 10 years into the future, Marcus Semien's strikeout rate would almost be half of what it was when he got that first prolonged opportunity when he broke through, it's a little bit like the George Springer progression, where when Springer was a prospect, he broke in, he had a good bit of swing and miss. He thought, okay, strikeouts are probably always part of the profile, low average, but power, speed. Okay, fine. That's all fine. That adjustment for Semien over time is pretty remarkable too. To see that continuing to go down in the macro trend. I mean, 3 consecutive seasons in Texas where he's been 17% or lower in K percentage. That's really impressive.
Yeah. You also see some of the fallbacks. He has gone to a high pull fly ball approach, reminiscent of sort of Isaac Paredes, Brian Dozier. There's been other guys that have done this over time. What you will find is a low BABIP on that. So despite the fact that he's cut all his strikeouts, he has a 283 career BABIP, and last year the 250 looks a little bit unlucky, but I wouldn't regress that all the way to 300 because this is the type of player he is. You also maybe see some diminishing returns from, the first time he kind of was this huge fly ball pull guy. He had 45 homers in Toronto. And, I guess pitchers at some point can kind of see what you're doing and stop pitching you high and tight or wherever it is that you like to do. You like to pull those fly balls. So it becomes a little bit harder to do that same strategy, and he's fallen off since then. But yeah, just a really excellent player. And I think if he falls because people are reaching for, much more fun, younger guys, I could see taking him. My favorite second baseman is in this tier.
Oh, well, I don't think we've talked about him yet, have we?
We have not. And I was doing some sorting to prepare for this, and there were only 2 second basemen last year that were above average in barrel rate, hard hit rate, strikeout rate, and swing. How much they chased on pitches outside the zone. There's only 2. One was Ketel Marte, and the other was Jordan Westburg. And I just love everything about him except his swing strike rate, and even his swing strike rate's not that bad. Even if Ketel Marte, even if he will never strike out as little as Ketel Marte does, Westburg does a lot of the same things. And I don't think Westburg gets enough credit for the quality of his batted balls. And I have no idea why he's projected to have the plate appearances that he does. If you look on Fangraphs, Jordan Westburg is projected for 580 plate appearances by the depth charts. I call BS. I don't know why they're low. If you have a guy who hits like this and you're like, I don't know if he's going to play at third or you're going to play at second, or he's not going to platoon. You're just a guy you put in the lineup. He's a right-hander for Epson Bibbles.
You seem like you're angry about this.
Try not to curse.
Saving our producer Brian Smith some bleeps, which is always nice. Just a little extra work on the back end to add those in. Yeah, we're not.
Yeah, no, I mean,
anymore.
I think you got to bump those plate appearances up. If you bump those plate appearances up, you bump his projection up, and then he looks better than some of the guys who are ahead of him on the auction calculator. Because if you look on the auction calculator, you say, he's the 15th best second baseman. Nah. Nope.
I think the other thing that you should consider when questioning the Jordan Westburg plate appearance totals that you see projected, and I agree, they're too low. We just saw with a crowded depth chart how the Orioles prioritized his playing time. And he spent some time on the IL, so that's where the missing playing time, the bulk of it came from, right? So how many days off do you think Jordan Westburg had while he was healthy all season?
I don't know, like 3?
8, which is a very reasonable number. So you could say over a full healthy season, 10 to 12 is probably what they would have given him, because he plays 2 positions. And like you said, he hits the ball hard. He does a lot of things well. I believe in those core skills. I think because the playing time is light, tools like the auction calculator are going to spit out a lower number. And I think that does hold Westburg back a little bit. The positional toss-up is Semien versus Westburg, older guy versus younger guy, much like the Altuve Albies toss-up. I don't think it's Westburg by miles, but I do think it's a clear preference for me for Jordan Westburg. I think there's so many questions about Marcus Semien's stolen base contribution at this point that the edge that Semien could have had in that category previously has been wiped away. And I want that quality of contact. I think if you're in an OBP league, Westburg does get dinged. Semien would too. So you have to keep that in mind if you're in that format. But the chase rate's not awful, and 11.8% barrel rate's really good for the position. And the dual eligibility is nice too. He's eligible at third base as well. So you can take him at second, and depending on how the rest of your draft goes, maybe you end up with a few of those guys you like later that are available. Then you bump him over and play him on the corner or play him at third. I think he hits enough to actually be a useful option at third too. So I do like Westburg where he's going. I wouldn't draft him earlier than where he's going, but I think it absolutely makes sense if you're trying to do well at this position at this price point. And I think this Orioles lineup is getting a little bit of extra negativity as a result of what happened in the postseason. I think people are collectively a little down on the Orioles, and I don't think they should be. I think this is still a really good core that's going to put up big numbers as a group, and I think Westburg will reap the benefits of that.
Just a real quick perusal of the historical since 1974 best seasons by a second baseman 34 years or older. It's a lot of steroid era people. I mean, like Brett Boone is number one in 2003. I haven't actually heard allegations specifically to that about Jeff Kent, but he's in that time frame. Randy Velarde, that same time frame.
Randy Velarde.
Lou Whitaker, fourth best second base season ever. It's a lot of defense in there because offensively, 279, 23 homers, 4 stolen bases. Just to give you a sense of where things are. Ian Kinsler in 2016 had 28 stolen bases, 14 stolen bases, 28 homers. Like, that's what you're hoping for from, Altuve and Semien is graceful aging. They both seem like they are capable of it. So I was expecting to pick this up and be like, the comps are bad, but the comps aren't bad.
Yeah.
I mean, Jose Altuve himself is on this list already.
Not surprised.
Jed Lowry, 2018.
Jed Lowry's on there?
18th best second base season by WAR, 267, 23 homers in 2018.
Tell him that.
24 and older. Yeah, I will tell him that.
So this group's not bad. I don't think it's a high priority must get someone here, but I do think the prices make some sense. I just like to flip the order. I like Albies more than Altuve. I like Westburg more than Semien. I don't think there's a hard avoid in the group. I think of the four, if you said who are you most likely to have no exposure to in the over the course of draft season, it's probably Semien. He's probably the one I would just miss on because there's some other guys in that pocket that have bigger categorical contributions at other positions that I think are higher ceiling players too. So if I were to miss out on Westburg, I might not pivot to Semien. I might just go to a different position entirely.
And I might end up having the most of Westburg because of these four, I'm tempted to say, I'm going to wait. If like all four are on the board, I'll wait a round. Oh, 3 are still on the board. I'm going to wait another round. 2 are still on the board. Oh, look, it's just Westburg. That's kind of how I might approach the tier.
Let's move down to the next tier. Yeah.
This is a trap.
Okay. Yesterday, I think your trap was a read I did not agree with.
You push back.
I fought back on it. But the first thing I thought when I saw Luis Garcia Jr. and Brice Turang and Luis Rengifo was, this is a trap because what I see with these three players, and I picked them apart and looked carefully, I didn't see anything in terms of underlying skills, job security, health grades. I didn't see anything that stood out compared to players in each of the next 2 tiers. So
there might be better players in the next 2 tiers. Yeah,
I think there's a very good chance. This may be the worst tier of players we talk about inside the top 200 at any position for the entire series. It would not surprise me if that's the case.
It's so easy to just fixate on their flaws. In fact, the first thing I want to do actually here is our first graphic. Let's throw up, this is the percentage of left-handers. So basically, these guys are platooned the most, right? So these are left-handed second basemen. How often do they see left-handers? So Luis Guillorme, 10%. We're going to talk Gavin Lux later. I don't know. I think the Reds will probably do this also, but the Dodgers had the ability to never let Gavin Lux see a left-hander. I mean, he saw 1,900 pitches, and he saw 190 from left-handers. So he's 10% lefty on lefty. He is a platoon guy. Edward Julian, fourth least. Nicky Lopez, Colt Keith is on this list. He's 7th. He only saw 17% lefty on lefty. Brandon Lowe, who we know is in a platoon, right? So that's like sort of a baseline. Oh, that guy's a platoon guy, 17%. So 17% is a good idea of like, oh, that's platoon. Brice Turang is on this list. Luis Garcia is on this list. Do you know what Brice Turang and Luis Garcia Jr. both have now? Guys that are right-handed to play their position that can take even more at-bats against lefties away. And, given that they both just came off of, Turang and Garcia Jr. both came off of decent seasons, the fact that they were already platoon bats at their position should ring some alarm bells for you.
It definitely does. I think the only factor that makes Turang potentially different than Garcia is elite defense. And we don't know for sure. if Turang's going to be the replacement for Willi Adames and move over and play shortstop. He's certainly capable of it. They've got options. They got Joey Ortiz. The last thing we talked about on the show was some comments that Pat Murphy made saying one of his thoughts or one of his preferences might be leave Turang alone and just move Joey Ortiz full-time to short instead of mixing and matching. But all those options are still on the table. There's nothing written in stone as far as how they're going to handle it. So you have to wonder, does Turang offer enough defensively to avoid a strict platoon? He's going to sit against some lefties, but you look at what they were doing in September last year. They saw a good number of lefties. I think he sat twice all month. Started against like 10 out of the 12 lefties the Brewers saw down the stretch. He's going to get buried in the bottom of the order, though, too. So even if he's playing, it's going to be hitting 8th or 9th. So you have to keep that in the calculations as well. I think the other part of Turang's profile that kind of hurts is just he doesn't have the Xavier Edwards batting average juice. At least he hasn't shown it so far. So if you're chasing him as a cheap steals target, 50 bags last year and 56 attempts. We know the Brewers like to run. Turang does it really well. I think you need to see at least another small step forward against righties for him to continue being a good enough 5x5 player to not be completely imbalanced. I think that's part of the problem. Players like this make sense like 50 to 75 picks later. You're giving up too much value somewhere else, taking Brice Turang where he's going right now. So I think that's my biggest argument against the whole tier, really. And I think we talked about, Amed Rosario joining the Nationals at the end of last week. I think Luis Garcia could be the guy that stands to lose the most playing time. They got a lot of lefties on that infield, so Rosario could move all over the place. And last year was a breakout by any reasonable measure. Luis Garcia Jr. had a great season last year, career highs in every roto category. He ran a lot more. This is a guy that has a ton of experience at a young age. He's over 1,700 big league plate appearances before his 25th birthday. And he's had a few up and down spurts that, probably didn't have to happen. So it could even be more than that. I'm just worried he's going to leak some playing time and come out a little bit light relative to other players at other positions that you can get at this price point.
Yeah, he has a 550 plate appearance projection that I agree with.
Right. And I think you need a little more, or at least a better path to more, to justify players like this in this range.
There is obviously an inherent bias in using NFC ADP, and for us, the drafts that we're in right now are on NFC, and these are weekly lineups, and so there's a little bit of an inherent bias for us into people that are not being platooned. We would rather have the plate appearances. We'd rather have someone who plays all week. But I would say this: somebody was asking me about what should my first fantasy baseball team league look like, and I said do weekly. You're probably coming from football, and you're probably not necessarily ready or willing to do the daily lineups for 162 games. That it's a slog. So if you are in a weekly lineup, then you do care. Even in the 10 and 12 team leagues, you do care about how much he's going to play on a weekly basis, right? If you are in a daily league, then Garcia is more interesting. However, even in those leagues, I'd say you have limited amount of bench slots. So yes, you can do fun things where you're like, oh, I have Luis Garcia Jr., but I also have Xander Bogaerts at short, and I can mush him over. You know what I mean? I'm going to platoon at second. You don't want to pick this high. You have a limited amount of bench slots to do that with. So you can't be like, oh, well, yeah, the guy I took in my 120th pick, I have to get also a guy in the bench to make it worthwhile, So, yeah, this is not a great tier.
There's a fun fact though for Luis Garcia Jr. I don't know how many players had the coverall in the sense of they started a game at each of the 9 spots in the batting order. But I started thinking about it when I was looking at the real life aspect. He's got a 318 OBP last year. That was a career best. 302 for his career so far. And I'm just like, okay, where does he fit in a lineup that keeps getting better with a lot of other young players?
Lower and lower.
Yeah, he's not much of a table setter. He did lead off a couple games at the end of the year when CJ Abrams was suspended, but that was just the end of the season. Didn't matter. But he literally hit in all 9 spots at some point last year. So where he fits this year, I think, also probably rides on showing one more step forward, at least against right-handed pitching. And I'm nervous.
If you're just ranking the best hitters in this lineup, you might start him at 5th.
Yeah.
He would at least be fourth right now. You'd get Abrams. I'm putting Lowe above him, and I'm putting James Wood above him. I don't think it's too hard of a stretch to say Dylan Cruz could become a better hitter than Luis Garcia Jr. this year.
Right.
So now he's your fifth hitter. Each of those slots costs you, I forget what it is. It's like 10 plate appearances over the course of the season or more.
It starts to add up pretty quickly.
Yeah. So and he's a platoon guy. On Rengifo, he's a guy that I really liked as depth, in draft and holds in the past couple seasons because he was available at a couple of positions. He could hit for some homers, steal some bags. And then last year, he stole 24 bags under the Ron Washington administration. And that may continue because they've been an aggressive team on the base paths. But his barrel rate cratered. And it's never actually been that good to begin with. So I don't know how much I believe the power. I think it's probably sort of, we're going to top out around 15, 16 homers as it has in the past, even with more playing time. But you could convince me that here's a guy who can hit 260 with 15 homers and 20 bags. And that's not bad for where in this tier. I do think there's like some risk around him that has nothing to do with him, which is that this is the last season he's under contract with the Angels. And we kind of know how the Angel season's going to go, don't we? That like they're going to start the season being like, yeah, we got some new guys and we're trying to be competitive. And then they're going to be selling at some point. Am I being dystopian? I don't know. I think that's being realistic. And when they sell, they're going to sell Rengifo. And will they sell Rengifo to a team that will start him or use him as he's been used in the past, which is kind of a roster spackle, kind of everywhere guy? And another reason that they'll sell is that Christian Moore is their top prospect. He's hitting tanks in the minor leagues. He's going to come up at some point. Now, that might just add another position eligibility, push Rengifo somewhere else. It's not like the Angels have a ton of guys everywhere,
Right.
But it does behoove them to trade Rengifo and give Moore the shot. So you may get a guy who's a good starter for 2/3 of the season and then, have to find other options at the end of the year. Maybe that's okay where this is. I think it's a little bit early for having those kind of risks attached to your pick.
It's a little early, but yet of the three options in this group, I think if you said you got to take one at their ADP, it's the horrible challenge. You just have to take one. You got to build the rest of your team around that.
Might be Rengifo, yeah.
I think it's Rengifo because it just cost me less than the others. I think knowing that Anthony Rendon is atop the depth chart at third base, that
he could move
kind
over
of
there.
Eases my concern about Christian Moore coming to nudge him off of second. Neto's injury to begin the season. I know they brought in Kevin Newman. You could play Rengifo at short if you really wanted to, just to start the year. So that's a possibility. He already has eligibility at third base, so you get some roster flexibility too. I do think the Angels will continue to run since Wash is still there. And I know the average getting up to 300 last year was probably a kind of a fluky BABIP thing, but it was a 12-homer, 48 steal pace for Rengifo when he got hurt. And that was within a wrist injury that he kind of tried to play through, went on the IL, and then had season-ending surgery for. He's been above average by WRC plus 3 years in a row.
Surgery. It's not really great buying guys after surgery.
It depends on the specific nature of the surgery, though, right? I mean, it's always a little bit weird. I think I'd like more information in the sense of like just knowing he's completely on the same schedule as everybody else in spring training.
Seeing him show up, yeah,
that would help a little bit too. But here's the big caveat. The problem, or the reason why I generally wouldn't draft him, is because I just don't see a lot of separation from Rengifo compared to the next cluster. It's like, well, again, there's other stuff that makes more sense. Let me look at this next tier and see if I can find value there.
Now, there's what's great about this tier, which is Bryson, Stott, Luis Arraez, Andrés Giménez, and Nico Hoerner, is they're all very different. And you in this pick, 150 to 200 range, they can put your build on the right track again. Like if you're, oh gosh, my batting average is sliding, this is why I do like to have some sort of tracker. My tracker is really simple. I just put the projections into Excel and just like have it against that average that I told you guys about, the 260, 20, 12 average. I have that average running, so I can be, I'm falling behind in steals. My batting average is falling. If you do find that your batting average is falling, what you can do is, Luis Arraez, one man spackle, one man roster fix, Andrés Giménez, I think, is your guy for steals. If Nico Hoerner is healthy, he's your guy for steals and batting average. So, and Stott can be, like that too. So these guys can really right the ship if your build is going a certain direction.
Yeah, and speaking to the similarities in some of the players in this group, Giménez's projection, again using Oopsie, 252 average, 12 homers, 30 steals. Bryson Stott, projection from the same projection system, 255, 12 homers, 29 steals.
Whoa.
They're very similar players. That's why they're clustered together. If you're looking for differences between them, for me, maybe it's that you had Stott earlier on the list of players that see a smaller share of time against lefties. I think the difference in lineup quality, Phillies versus Jays, is enough for me to nudge Stott as like my preference rankings wise. I think Nico Hoerner, health permitting, has a similar projection as well, probably with a little more average. Yeah, 269 average, a little less power, 5 homers, 27 steals. I think we've seen a little bit of categorical juice from Hoerner in the past, where you could say that stolen base projection might be light, and that might help offset the differences in power between the three players. But I think he goes last in part because of the health, right? You get good health reports in spring training. Maybe he closes the small gap between the trio. But I think you're basically fixing the same problem. I'm speed light. Maybe I'm a little lighter. I'm heavier on RBIs than runs, and I need an average that won't hurt me. I think each of those three players will do that. And then the outlier of the bunch is Luis Arraez, who continues to be an unusual build player every single year. I find that the formats in which I like Luis Arraez are basically the less traditional formats. Like Roto, great, yes, but I like him more in mono leagues. I like him more in draft and hold leagues. As far as like a 12-team league where I can make moves, I generally don't like Luis Arraez in those types of leagues. He seems like a guy that I always steer away from, even though, yes, there's clear value and he helps you in batting average. I just feel like a lot of times he doesn't do enough in any of the other categories, and that doesn't work for how I like to have a roster.
Yeah, I had him in Autonew one year, and I was first in batting average by like 15 points. I know it wasn't the only guy, but I was first in batting average by 15 points, and I was like 10th in homers and steals.
You're right, and it wasn't all his fault.
All his fault, but it's like he did not help my roster in ways. I traded him. I was just like, this is not helping me.
Or it's like your brain on draft day didn't like do the right corrections. And I don't think I can do it for some reason. Yes, there are tools that could help me, but I'm just not wired to play with a Luis Arraez in my
help
lineup.
You because then you can see, I'm at 270 batting average and I only need 262. So I'm now going to like pick the Dalton Varshows of the world or whatever, like you can the tracker can help you a little bit, but it's true. We avoid these really low batting average guys on purpose, and that sort of becomes ingrained, and they don't even show up sometimes on the ADP list if you're in the draft room, where like they're not high. And then you also look like an idiot because, you're picking that guy now? And you're like, yeah, because he fits what I need because I had Arraez. I don't know. It's a little bit like the opposite of taking Kyle Schwarber. I know the auction calculator will spit out a certain value for Kyle Schwarber and Luis Arraez, but they can often push your build in uncomfortable directions. One nice thing about Arraez is he's dropping in terms of how much it costs, and at this point you could use him as a reaction as opposed to something that changes what you do afterwards. So if you went Ellie first, I think Arraez here makes sense.
Yeah, if you went Ellie, and I think the key is also knowing like you're tracking high in power in the subsequent rounds in your hitter build, and you say, all right, like I can undo the biggest damage of my first round pick here and not hurt myself because I did so well with the other 7 or 8 hitters I already have from a power perspective. You have to make sure you're running ahead in power if you're going to do this. So he's similar to Xavier Edwards as a speed correction play. It's all average though. And I like being able to at least get 2 categories. And I think in the case of Arraez, like You're hoping for a good run scored total. His OBPs are high enough where he's usually going to be high in the order. He's not a great base runner, but look at the run scored totals, right? 88 his last season with the Twins, 71 his full season in Miami, and 83 last year, split between Miami and San Diego. So at least it's pretty good in that category. It's light in RBIs. He did steal 9 bases last year, so I wonder if he can keep picking his spots, but that was a career high by more than double. So I don't love it, even though we outlined the case for it. It's a player you rely on only really in certain situations as Luis Arraez goes.
I have a favorite in this tier. Just want to give him some love real quick.
Yeah.
And a surprise to me because he has not been a guy that I've been picking a lot of in the past. But somehow his dropping price, his new team, and some particulars of his new team make me interested in Andrés Giménez. Now, I think that what I like is, I was talking earlier about how like 180 steals is a lot of steals. And you're going to need multiple 30 steal guys, you know. So borderline, you know, like sort of baseline, you get 25 to 30 steals from Andrés Giménez next year. I believe in that. So the floor is there. The reason that I'm kind of interested in is that we talk about like barrel rate. Oh, so he hit 9 homers last year and he had a 2.8% barrel rate. He deserved only having the 9 homers. The power isn't there. But barrel rate itself can regress. And he had 5 and 6% barrel rates before when he was hitting 15 and 17 homers. So you could just, you know, bake in natural regression there and give him some of his power back. And that's what the projections do. Oopsie has 12, Steamer has 13, whatever. There's a little bit more power than he had last year. And then the last bit is when they acquired him, the Blue Jays said, we see some things that he was doing when he had more power that he stopped doing last year. And so I like that new voice idea, new batting coach, new voice. And then the last bit is I look at the Blue Jays and, you know, yes, he's a lefty that could be platooned, but he has elite second base defense, and I think they'll want that because Bo Bichette does not necessarily have elite shortstop defense, and I think he can maybe cover for him a little bit there. And then on top of that, I finally figured out the math. You have 4 bench spots. That means you need 5 guys to play every day.
You figured it out?
It doesn't work exactly like that.
No, you really need 5 regulars.
You kind of need 5 regulars. Dalton Varsho, Bo Bichette, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., and to some extent, George Springer. That's 4. Andrés Giménez might start all the time. You might need Davis Schneider in left field to platoon with Loperfido. You might need Wagner to help at third base. Or in right field when Springer needs a blow. You know, I haven't even, like, DH seems like an amalgam of people. So there's a lot of places where you need energy. And to me, having Bo and Andrés up the middle seems like the plan. They acquired him right when the price went up on Andrés Giménez in terms of his extension. And they want him. And I think they see him as a regular.
I think the defense alone is very valuable. It's much like Brice Turang, elite defender at second base. The key difference for me, Turang has struggled against lefties. Giménez, for his career, has a 100 WRC plus against lefties. The platoon risk is very low when you pair average production with the bat in that split over a multi-year snapshot with that glove. Turang doesn't have that level of offensive floor, and that's where the difference in price gets me too. I'm just like, hey, yeah, Turang might steal more bases, but you probably have 5 to 7 more homers from Giménez. The possibility of even more than that if they do make an adjustment. You don't need it at this rate, but probably better counting stats too, likely higher in the lineup. I think there's the overall case there for Giménez is strong.
And you get the picks.
Yeah.
Like you get to wait 50 picks or whatever.
Yeah. But I also like that if you were to wait for Giménez and then someone else gets you, you're not screwed. Like there's still another
There's 4 guys in this tier
cluster
that are kind of similar like them. And you like the next tier.
Right. Moving on to tier 5 on YouTube, from Gelof to India. And you're like, oh, well, that's different. Usually they list all the players. They don't fit. There's so many second basemen between pick 200 and 250. Gelof sort of starts the group. You have Maikel Garcia, who's also third base eligible.
Gleyber Torres.
Gleyber now in Detroit. Willi Castro, who's eligible everywhere. You have Colt Keith, who's going to probably move to first base with Gleyber being in Detroit. Brendan Donovan, who can play a couple of spots. Brendan Lowe, big side platoon guy. Jackson Holliday, if you do want the what could go right top end prospect.
I kind of like that idea in like a 10-teamer, just like take Jackson Holliday, and if it doesn't work out, you just go to there'll be somebody on the one of these guys will be on the waiver wire.
A couple of these players, likely the Castro Donovan types, but worst case scenario, you have someone that's okay, and best case scenario, you have someone who's supposed to be a stud figuring it out.
I like one guy that I just like in this tier that I want to throw out there is Jake Cronenworth, multiple eligibilities. He's on a deal that will not get dealt. Nobody is buying Jake Cronenworth on a 7-year deal, so he's not going to get traded into a different situation. And they're actually more likely to trade players around him away and make him more needed as a regular player. So Jake Cronenworth, as boring as a 260, 18-5 collection of stats might seem to you, it's like one of the more solid floors, I think, in terms of his skill set, his age, and the team around him. There's no way that they're going to acquire more players that make him less important. Like, he is super important because his contract is unmovable.
Yeah, it's an interesting group, though, because you do start to hit the platoon risk or the super utility risk here. There's a lot more of that in this entire group. Let's start with Gelof, though, because I think Gelof is probably immune from that for another year. He's a righty, for one, so that helps. I think defensively, I think there's enough value there, too. He's not not like an elite defender, but I think he's a good defender, so you're not like worried about his glove. I know there were adjustments to his swing. There were questions about that when he debuted and was so good. He hit the ground running in 2023. He was a little less than a half season, hit 14 homers, stole 14 bases, had a 132 WRC plus, and came back last year, 17 homers, 25 steals, pretty light counting stats because he struck out 34.4% of the time and put together a 211, 270, 362 slash line. So you're buying him coming off of a pretty harsh follow-up to a really nice debut. Thinking about some of the factors we talked about, the A's, moving out of the Coliseum into a more hitter-friendly environment in Sacramento, a team that's still very frugal and is unlikely to add a lot. And then looking at projections that will bury him because of his average and saying, hey, wait, it's 2020 with pretty good counting stats, so it's balanced. Can you tell yourself a story with Zack Gelof that he could at least get the K rate back down to where it was as a rookie? And the projections kind of split the difference, but you have some proof, and the minor league K rates weren't horrible at a lot of his stops. Like, I keep looking at him and thinking this is a really nice player in this group that does a few more things. Everybody else that's in this tier leans a little more heavily with a different categorical balance.
I think this team also needs him, and they remember what a great beginning of the career he had and how they've got a little bit of a chance here for a Matt Chapman, Matt Olson type player that can be the young face of the franchise. That's what his promise was when he first debuted. That's the kind of person and personality he can be. And I think they want that. So I think they're going to play him, every day and until it becomes obvious that he's not that. And on top of that, if you look at his first and second half splits, you'll say, oh, well, he had a 650-ish OPS in the first half, 613 in the second half. The adjustments he was making didn't work. But I think that's a little bit too results-based. If you look at his strikeout rate, it went down in the second half. If you look at his infield fly ball rate, he cut it in half in the second half. And he pulled the ball more and he hit the ball harder. So, these things are small sample to the fact that it's half a season. But, his whole career is a little collection of small samples. And I think it points to at least being able to cut that strikeout rate to about 30% like he had in the second half, and put together, a little bit more of what he did in 2023 than he did in 2024. If you give some of the batted ball quality that he had in 2023 to his 2024 line, he would have had a better season. So power, speed, and if you kept the batting average high, this is the kind of player that you get to pick later, because you did so.
You left that buffer in. Like maybe you took an earlier catcher and you're not taking as much of a batting average sinkhole there. You kind of avoided some of the lower average mashers along the way. Gelof would make a ton of sense there. I think the average could be like a 240, 245. It can only hurt you slightly. It might not hurt you as badly as the projections are putting out there. Maikel Garcia was really trendy throughout last draft season. And now he's a little cheaper than he was a year ago. Coming off a year where he slugged 332, went 37 for 39 as a base stealer, and did still hit the ball hard a good bit. 42.6% is a nice hard hit rate, but only a 3.7% barrel rate. That's pretty much the same thing we saw in 2023. Tons of hard hit balls, but not a lot of hard hit balls in the air doing damage. Are we at the point now where what we see is what we get? I mean, he's still young. He's going to turn 25 in March, but it just seems like they're having a difficult time, or he's having a difficult time making the adjustments to turn that hard contact into more damage. The park works against him a little bit, but I'm just curious where you're at on Garcia right now, because it's a little bit like the extreme Ke'Bryan Hayes third base. Second base helps being able to get him in the middle, but if you use him as a third baseman, he doesn't do things that most third basemen do.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it also is like a reminder to buy what you see and what's projected rather than what you hope. Pay the cost for what you see and what's projected rather than what you hope will happen. That's the benefit you stand to reap. And so I think with now his price being down, I just see him as a way to get 30 stolen bases with a decent average. And nothing much more than that. So, I do think he's a good example for why, if you missed out on Andrés Giménez, there's Maikel Garcia.
You have a chance. Yeah. From a stolen base perspective, you're probably not getting the same amount of power. You are taking on more playing time risk, because I would say with Maikel Garcia, he's shown in the past, like in 23, he was a phenomenal defender by metrics. 24 numbers didn't like him as much. But when you get down to a 69 WRC plus over a full season, teams are going to start to find other guys they can play ahead of you.
Yeah, it's not even related to handedness or whatever. But, then he could end up in a platoon with Massey at second base, who's...
Well, they brought in India too, though.
Yeah. So I don't really like India going into this ballpark. I know we have ways to... project players in new ballparks. I know even Oopsie, looks at his bat speed and his barrel rate and stuff like that, and gives him a higher slugging percentage than the other ones. I think Kauffman is a place like I just remember talking to who was the big third base prospect that came up for the Royals and then had to go back down again.
How long ago? Like Moustakas, or like more recently? Before Moustakas?
Yeah. He was like the guy that won the championship with them. Like he was in left field.
Alex Gordon.
So I had a really interesting conversation with Alex Gordon where he's like, I came up and I thought I could hit for power in this park, and then it just hit me on my ass, and I realized I had to hit more line drives than fly balls. And when I hear somebody, Alex Gordon, that dealt with it for so long and had such a hard time with it, and I see Jonathan India coming from Cincinnati, he's going to get hit in the nose, I think. You know what I mean? He's going to be like, what the hell is this?
I think it's possible, but I also think Jonathan India, his approach as a hitter has always been a little more just like work the count, hit tool-y than trying to crush a lot of homers. Like I could see that problem happening to a lot of players. I almost think they acquired India believing he was a good fit for their park more than thinking his power was going to just come right over, right? I think the Royals accounted for that, even though it makes life more difficult for him, for sure. India, to me, is more of like a bench guy. I just want to say also, a bench guy? Like a bench guy in fantasy. Like I don't... Yeah. And he only plays the one position, so he's not really like a bench guy that I'm excited about.
I think he's going to play outfield is the other part I was going to say.
Oh, okay.
Because he's not well rated defensively at second base. And this outfield, when I looked at the biggest holes left on contenders, the Royals are actually projected to be in the top 15 by Fangraphs WAR. Last year, they had the 27th best outfield by WAR. It's Hunter Renfroe, Kyle Isbell, and MJ Melendez right now. And Hunter Renfroe is 32 and coming off 2 straight seasons where he was below average offensively and defensively. In fact, if you add up his WAR from the last 2 seasons, you get 0.3. Kyle Isbell is going to stay there because he's defensively good, right? MJ Melendez, I've touted so often, and yet at some point you can't look at the process stats and say what could be. At 1,600 plate appearances in MJ Melendez's career, I feel like I can say I don't care as much about the barrel rate anymore. I don't care as much about the max EV. He is who he is. And who he is a guy who's been below replacement for his career. So the corner outfields are the easiest places to change things. Maybe Massey goes out there and India stays at second, but I think Massey was rated fine defensively.
Right. Well, I think they need to play. They need quality bats. They need guys that can at least be big side platoon guys that are like solid for them. And Massey does enough things well where I can.
Dude.
I know. I think the run they had in 2024 to me is one of the more difficult ones to sustain. As impressive as it was, and as an organization, and we talked about the interview JJ Piccolo had on Starkville, and the changes they've made as an organization seem real. Like they do seem like a group that has done a lot to kind of change their process for the better. I still look at them and say, wow, that's a pretty tough gap to close with the talent they've got right now. Or it's a tough trick to pull off twice. So I'm a little bit
like on this
bearish
team.
on
You like Witt, you like, but Perez is aging, Pascantino.
I like Vinny.
Yeah, I like him. But that's
about it.
2 guys you like that are in their peak. One guy that you liked but is old.
Sal's fine.
And then India, who he's going to be their leadoff guy, I guess.
Yeah, be an OBP machine.
So you got 4 good hitters. And 4 good hitters can be enough if the other guys are okay, but the other guys are not okay.
Yeah. Yeah, you're going to need some surprises. You're going to need either guys that haven't played in the big leagues yet to come up and hit right away, or second or third chance guys to have it click.
I don't really see it either. Nick Lofton, 26-year-old, had a 133 WRC plus in AAA last year, but when you're that old, you got to discount that number. He wasn't really that good in the minors. They've got Brendan Shoemake. I mean, what you need is for Maikel Garcia to lift the ball with that hard hit rate.
That would be nice, but also not expecting it. It'd be great if it happened, but not walking into the season expecting that to be the outcome.
Weimer could do
might
something.
play a lot. Great defensive center fielder, has some pop. But it's a guy. It's players like that need to surprise. I think if they're going to be as good as they were in 2024, they're going to get back to the postseason. It's going to be a few surprises.
I think India could add outfield eligibility. I think he might hit 11 homers and steal 11 bags and hit 250, which just leaves me cold for fantasy.
But let's think about this. Gleyber Torres has to take a 1-year deal to try to go back to free agency next year, and he goes into a much more difficult place to hit in Detroit.
Yeah. He needs to pull the ball. He needs to pull the ball because if he's been doing this opposite field thing, and opposite field, right, like that place where he's hitting into in Detroit is not a good place to hit opposite field fly balls.
I get the sense that if you had to, kind of bet on something you haven't seen, if you have to forecast a change of some kind, you want the conditions to be such that the player has to go through an entire offseason, like Gleyber is, with a chance to do something new. I imagine if we're talking about it, his agents have talked about it. People around him have said, okay, what's our plan? How are we going to get back to right? How are we going to get back to mid-20s home run power?
You could even look at his career just on Fangraphs with him and be like, hey, do you see your pull rate in the years that you hit homers? You used to pull the ball 44% of the time. That's when you hit 38 homers. I know it was 2019, but could we get back to pulling the ball 42% of the time and see what happens?
Could we? And I realize that Playing in Yankee Stadium helps. But could we look at the 2 seasons he just had in 22 and 23? 24 homers, 25 homers, 10 steals, 13 steals.
Hit the ball hard.
Can we look at that and just say, okay, the hard hit rate comes back. We take a few homers away because Comerica is the home park now. Could we see 18 to 20 homers with double-digit steals and nice counting stats because he's among the guys the Tigers count on in an everyday role? Like, that doesn't seem ridiculous, and I'm probably willing to find out at this price. He's still just 28, turned 28 in December. So I think comparing him to the post-Gelof options in this group, comparing him to Maikel Garcia, I like Gleyber Torres better. Compared to Willi Castro and Brendan Donovan, no question. Compared to even Brandon Lowe, who the projections like because he hits the ball really hard, I like Torres because Lowe to me is still a pretty clear big side platoon guy. So he loses too much
daily
playing
league.
time.
You might prefer Lowe.
Yeah, daily league where I can
New park,
auto new some things like that. Sure, Brandon Lowe pops. Like there are use cases for Lowe, but I'm worried about him in weekly leagues a little bit because the health and
the only
the
thing
way
about Torres is what's the Torres ADP and what's the Cronenworth ADP?
Cronenworth goes later. Cronenworth goes around pick 300, so he's like the late second base.
And
Torres is more like pick 220.
I think they have the same projection,
and I think Torres still shows me enough at times where I think he's just better. But I could see them ending up at the same point. And I also don't want to play I'm passing on Gleyber because of Cronenworth. I feel like that's cutting it too thin. That's cutting the slice so thin you can't even see it.
You actually can play that game like, why take this guy when you can take this guy later? You can play that all the way from the top of the rankings to the bottom.
Well, yeah, you could start with one red paper clip and end up with the moon. But if you had the moon and you keep trading it down, you do get the paper clip back going the other way. Somebody ended up with the paper clip. You don't want that to be you. How about Jackson Holliday, though? Okay, so Gleyber, fine at the price. Jackson Holliday versus Colt Keith was actually something of a toss-up, I think, last year at this position. Keith played all year in the big leagues. Holliday very clearly didn't.
Let's throw up our graphic.
The same, the lefty one again, or the other one?
No,
hard hit.
This is the hard. So this is second half hard hit rate for second baseman, and Ketel Marte is at the top, of course, because it's Ketel Marte, and he's always going to be at the top of the hard hit leaderboard for second baseman. Gavin Lux is second. We know he's an extreme platoon risk, but at least he was hitting the ball and swinging fast in the second half. Brandon Lowe was third. We know he's like the barreler in this group. Jackson Holliday was fourth. It didn't lead to a total renaissance. He had an 87 WRC plus, 8.5% barrel rate, still had strikeout situations, but he was hitting the ball hard. So I like that. I also like that the upside here, I don't think Lux will be an everyday player. I think he'll be platooned. We know Brandon Lowe will be platooned. We just made the argument that Luis Garcia Jr. will be platooned. Brandon Rogers, who's next on the list, does not have a job. David, so we can't talk on his platoon risk necessarily. Davis Schneider is a platoon player, small side platoon player. He's next on the list. Lennon Sosa, I don't think is an everyday player. Jorge Polanco is 32 and doesn't have a job yet. Michael Massey has already been being platooned. Otto Lopez is maybe not an everyday player. Jared Triolo, I'm going down the list here. Jared Triolo, I don't know if he's an everyday player. He's kind of interesting, and he hit the ball 39% hard 39% of the time. That's a little bit interesting. Connor Norby is on here. Then you get Semien, Horwitz, and Keith. And by the time you get to Keith, 36.4 is not necessarily that impressive. So Jackson Holliday is the guy on this list that could be an everyday player and has still star ceiling. And I think we saw a little bit of that with a 46% hard hit rate. That is pretty impressive for someone who otherwise had a depressing, terrible year.
Yeah, and if Jackson Holliday didn't play in the big leagues at all, I say this like every draft season about somebody. If Jackson Holliday hadn't played in the big leagues at all, the way we talk about him and think about him would be completely different. Because for the time he was at AAA last year, as a 20-year-old, 73 games, he popped 10 homers, he stole 8 bases, he walked 21% of the time, and ran a 142 WRC plus. And because the first 60 games in the big leagues were not a top prospect that just hit the ground running, it creates that little bit of doubt. The projections spit out less than full-time playing time because it's a crowded depth chart. I understand it. But power, speed, an okay average, a very good OBP, and a K rate that you can wrestle with as much as you want. 26.6% from Steamer, 25.5% from Oopsie. There's so much hit tool here. I have a very hard time looking at Jackson Holliday, thinking about all the things that people who analyze prospects said and wrote about him the last couple of years, and telling myself he's a complete bust already. Like that just seems insane to me to just be that quick to say, they were wrong about Jackson Holliday. I think that's silly.
Still.
I think there's a really nice opportunity to get early round potential at a lower mid-round sort of price. And I think the draft and hold him in right now, he's my UT right now. He's just like my guy that I threw out there. I'm like, hey, this is probably going to be helpful at some point. Don't know when. I agree with what you said earlier. I think one of the ways to think about shallow leagues in particular is the later clusters, fine ceiling. If someone else were to take Jackson Holliday ahead of you, and Zack Gelof's already gone, I do think Colt Keith also has more growth potential, right? I mean, I think there is a case to be made for Colt Keith that if they're going to play him at first base, they obviously like the bat. And as he spent time in the big leagues last year, we saw some adjustments. A 19.8% strikeout rate for a rookie that played all year? That's really good. Non-zero speed, who's 7 for 8 as a base stealer. I don't think he's a burner. I don't think he's going to get you to 20 bags. He doesn't have to. I think he's going to be good in batting average, maybe even great in the long run. And I think he's got a lot of power. We didn't see it right away. It was only a 5.6% barrel rate, but he was a guy that ran a 40% hard hit rate at AAA in 2023, 35% hard hit rate in his debut, and he's still so young. I think there's another level from Colt Keith, but you do have to ask yourself the question of, in the Tigers' core, is he occasionally sitting against lefties or frequently sitting against lefties? We saw some evidence late in the year when every single game mattered. He was not a strict platoon player. He sat against some lefties, but he played against some lefties too.
Well, yeah, I mean, what they were really doing was trying to decide between Parker Meadows and Colt Keith as the strict platoon guy. And what ended up happening was they didn't strictly platoon either, and they kind of give both of them both chances. Kerry Carpenter ended up going into a strict platoon. Colt Keith, I talked to him about his season late in the year, and he talked about being domed up. And so early in the season, he was trying to pull everything because, you know, I talked to him back at the Arizona Fall League too, where at the Fall League we talked about, are you adding, you seem like a guy who can let the ball travel, have good contact rates. Are you adding pull power to it? And he said, yes, that's what I'm trying to do. That's what the sort of directive for me is to try and pull the ball for power on top of this sort of good plate discipline and contact package. And so that's how he sort of added power and advanced through the minor leagues. So he got to the big leagues. I'm going to pull the ball, right? You look at his graph for, his rolling average, pulled the ball a lot, hit really poorly. Started going back to his regular, hey, let me find who I am. Let me remember who I am at my core. My core is let the ball travel, take walks, make contact, spray doubles. When he did that, his WOBA went up, and he had a really good middle of the season. What I like is that the pull came back. It didn't come back like it did at the very beginning. He was pulling the ball 60% of the time in his first 20 games. Like, that's intense. What he did at the end of the season was he started pulling around 40%. And I think that is, he's meshing the two things. So I think we saw a lot of sort of adjustments from Keith last year that will kind of go over into the next season. And, I also think if you play the 5 regulars game with the Tigers, you get in trouble real quick. Like, you got Riley Green and Gleyber Torres, and you're done.
That's your whole list of clear regulars right now for them?
Yes.
I
know they're going to mix and match, and it's not going to be strict platoons and, blah, 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 blah. But, those are the 2 guys that I think will play every day. And so I think Colt Keith can easily, through offense, play his way into an everyday role.
I think he can, too. I think what's weird to me is that I think Wenceel Perez is going to play less than any depth chart will lead you to believe. So you have to kind of build that in. I think Kerry Carpenter plays enough in the actual outfield where if Spencer Torkelson hits, he can coexist in the same lineup as Keith, even if Keith is the first baseman. Mm-hmm. That's the main takeaway I have with the Tigers, and like, how do you make the pieces fit?
I think Wenzel Perez profiles as a backup. You know?
Yeah, he's a nice backup player. I think Parker Meadows is probably closer to like in the play him every day. I think he showed some growth and defensively offers enough value.
Center fielder and shortstop, you want that.
Right. You know, and I don't think they have that at short right now. I think because of Baez and the contract, Trey Sweeney will play a lot, and then Baez will still play some. So they might be one of the few teams that platoons at shortstop because of the unusual circumstances for as long as Baez is still on the roster.
Yeah, their build-a-bench is going to be really interesting, but we shouldn't spend too much time on it just to say Colt Keith is interesting even if his platoon things. And I also wanted to say this. Here are some players who were 21 or younger in their debuts and were bad. Robin Yount.
We're going back a long way.
Ozzie Guillen. Elvis Andrews, Carl Crawford, Edgar Renteria, Xander Bogaerts. Harold Baines is a Hall of Famer, so I guess I'll name him. But Paul Molitor.
It's a bunch of guys. When you're that young and you debut in the big leagues, it's a huge adjustment to make. And all we've heard people who analyze the minor leagues say for the last 3 years now is that the gap is wider than ever. So I'm always going to be patient with guys like Keith and Holliday. And this is even a gap in just like how those guys were perceived and covered as prospects and how they've been ranked. But there's a pretty wide gap there. But whatever age to level of context you've always thought about making your big league debut, I think you've got to keep making sure you're fine tuning that to adjust for just how difficult it is to hit in the big leagues right now. Beyond this group, the late second baseman, you've got a wide open group here, including names like Christopher Morel and Jake Cronenworth. You got a prospect in Christian Campbell who can play a bunch of spots. You have Jose Caballero as a multi-eligible position guy. Hye-Sung Kim in Los Angeles, playing more perhaps with Gavin Lux in Cincinnati. Lux himself is in this group, although Lux now has a min pick of 190 in the last 14 days. So I think that ADP is already moving up, even with some of the platoon risk we've talked about. Spencer Horowitz has dual eligibility. Thairo Estrada in Colorado is kind of interesting. Caleb Durbin could be part of the tumbling dryer full of options in Milwaukee at third base.
Thairo, Cronenworth are at the top for me. I wanted to point out that I think we're starting to hear that the Nolan Arenado trade rumors are dying down. I do think he could make some sense for the Yankees, but there may not be a big taste for, older players. They have DJ LeMahieu still there, and like they may just feel like, do we really want that energy? We want someone who, like, we'd rather have like a Bregman or something, like somebody's like.
They signed Goldschmidt though, man. Maybe they would want to just take the Cardinals corners from last year and bring them both over.
Anyway, I wanted to list it as a possibility because right now Jazz Chisholm is listed as second baseman. DJ LeMahieu's starting at third. I don't think that's going to happen. But I also wanted to point out that he'd been linked in rumors to both Jorge Polanco and Brendan Rodgers, and that they may go with the low-cost alternative, which is a 1-year bounce-back deal. That's the other thing. Paul Goldschmidt is old, but he's also a 1-year bounce-back deal. So if that's what they're looking for, is not being sort of committed to someone long-term because they see somebody else coming in free agency in the next couple of years or whatever it is, or they just don't want to be, they don't want to be locked into anybody. They could get Brendan Rodgers or Jorge Polanco on a 1-year deal. And those guys may not surpass Cronenworth and Lux and Thairo Estrada for me, but they would jump just right below them. They would be people I'd be interested in. Brendan Rodgers in Yankee Stadium, with that lineup, I think would be interesting. Jorge Polanco would be interesting. He's a switch hitter. He may play. May play a lot.
Yeah, this group has a lot of fun names in it. I think Morel, second and third base eligible, has been discussed a lot over the years on this show. Just getting a clean slate to begin the year in Tampa and still being a guy that's not going to turn 26 until June, relatively young in terms of big league experience. does enough things well in terms of the quality of contact and did cut the K rate last year where we could see kind of a consolidation year from him. And it's not in the Trop. It's at Steinbrenner Field too. So less of a challenging home park as a result of the unfortunate circumstances that have pushed the Rays out of the Trop for this year. But it's just like you can actually still find some ceiling here. I think the question for just about everybody that goes this late is, where do you see the most playing time? Because a player like Spencer Horwitz has, I think, the 8th best WOBA projection from Oopsie at second base. That should matter on a Pittsburgh team that needs to figure out who its core bats are.
I bought him in Autonew, Spencer Horwitz, because of the projections and because, you know, the Pirates don't really have above average hitters. He might get platoon, but, you know, the same exercise we went through with O'Neal Cruz, where we're like, wow, Billy Cook is listed as a platoon partner for like 3 different guys. You know, that goes for Horwitz too. It's like, if Horwitz plays well enough, then they can put Cook somewhere else to platoon. And also, you know, Billy Cook, a 26-year-old rookie, you know, who's played 49 plate appearances in the big leagues, is not someone that you need to get into the lineup. You know, in fact, you'd be happy as hell if Horwitz played so well that you didn't need Cook in your lineup. So I think there's a chance that Horwitz gets that playing time. I think he's a better pickup in daily leagues, but he's a decent late guy for sure, especially since he'll give you corner infield and middle infield eligibilities.
I think the question for me with Thairo Estrada is actually more about how aggressively they're going to promote Adael Amador. He debuted last year in part just because of injuries. I don't think they really looked at him and said, yeah, he's ready. He was just the guy they could kind of fit in that spot temporarily. But Thairo Estrada was not a bad player for the Giants. Injuries last year ended up taking away some time. They move on. But double-digit homers in back-to-back years in 22 and 23 with 20-plus steals. He's not an extreme barreler, but you put him in Coors for half of his games. Put anybody in Coors that can make some contact for half of their games, some power, some speed. I think he's going to be an okay glue guy unless we see Amador as someone that's going to just bang down the door and steal a job by the end of the season.
Yeah, and you know, they could play him every day until the trade deadline.
Right, yeah, you could just get traded and end up being a part-time guy somewhere else. But at this price, if that happens, it's not really going to hurt you.
Yeah, I think he's one of the better picks down here. Hae-Seon Kim in LA is interesting, but the projection is actually, you know, what we've got from Steamer is 97 WRC plus. But you remember, Steamer is actually one of the more friendly to rookies projections. Oopsie has a 77 WRC plus.
That's a huge difference. 217, 285, 339 from Oopsie versus 279, 324, 374 from Steamer. Wow.
And even with the better projection, the depth charts have him with 400 plate appearances. I will point out that his biggest platoon partner at the position in Fangraphs is Mookie Betts, who might be the shortstop.
Right. That's why this is so goofy all the time with the Dodgers.
It's really goofy.
I think they cleared the spot by trading Lux because they want Kim to play. I think your choices are trusting the Dodgers front office and scouting department versus numbers in situations where the numbers are pretty unreliable.
Well,
Which side are you on?
I just struggle with the fact that Betts was not a good defensive shortstop, and so I don't think he should be the shortstop. But Miguel Rojas is super old, and Edman was already getting moved off to shortstop, so I don't think they have a shortstop. And Kim was moved off to shortstop like 2-3 years ago in Korea. I
think it bothers you more than it bothers the Dodgers. So you got to learn to stop worrying and just love the way they're going about it.
Well, if Betts is the shortstop, then Kim is the second baseman, I guess.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, yeah, so you could make that bet. He bats left-handed, so he could lose time to Chris Taylor, who, you know, they did the thing that I said they wouldn't do, was trade Gavin Lux to keep Chris Taylor on their bench.
No. They didn't. No, I refuse to believe that. And we're done. We're done with this corner of their depth chart. They're going away until they make another move or until the team preview. No more Dodger talk. No, we're done.
Well, I had to bring up Sem Kim. He also has a 15 stolen base projection, so he could be someone that if you were hurting on stolen bases.
I love projections. I think we're going to look at the projections for Sem Kim and just like scratch our heads after the season is over. I don't think he's a star. I don't think he's going to be amazing. I just think the projections are just kind of broken in this instance.
We do have some prospects here. We should talk really quickly about the two biggest prospects at second base in a long time: Travis Bazzana and Christian Campbell. They're both really exciting. Some places have Campbell as the number one prospect. I just saw Jarrett Seidler say on Blue Sky that he thought that Christian Campbell had less to work on than Roman Anthony. I'm working on a story about Christian Campbell, and there's some momentum that to begin opening day on the roster. I tend to bet against things like that. And if the deeper your league is, the more you could crash out and lose, by picking Campbell high, and then he spends the majority of the season in the minor leagues where he's of no use to you. But I will say that David Hamilton profiles as a backup to me, and Vaughn Grissom seems like a forgotten guy. And David Hamilton may need me needed at shortstop if and when Trevor Story gets hurt. So there is a road where Campbell ends up in the big leagues to begin the season, which changes a lot about how you would think about him. Travis Bazzana, I don't think has that same road. He only played an A-ball last year.
Right. I mean, Christian Campbell moved fast. Like Christian Campbell played 40 games at high A last year and ended up closing out the year with 19 games at Worcester after a long stint at Double A. So I think with Bazzana, it's more like if everything goes well with him,
he could do something like that.
His season looks, and like maybe because he's a 1-1 guy, they would say, well, he got the high A experience already. Maybe like a late August, the Gunnar Carroll debut
but
time
they also
is possible.
Have another guy who goes in this area as a possibility. The guy they traded Nolan Jones for, Juan Brito, who isn't that great, but he profiles as a Cleveland Guardian through and through. High walk rate, low strikeout rate, mediocre power, but was 13% better than league average in AAA at 22, and doesn't seem to have to do much more in the minor leagues. He may start opening day as the second baseman in Cleveland. The projections aren't super excited about that prospect. 230 average, 6 homers, 4 stolen bases in a third of a season. But the fact that he's closer to playing time, I think I might be for just this year, I might prefer Juan Brito to Travis Bazzana, just because I think they'll give him a long look at second base.
I do think I'm comfortable with Campbell at this price, even with the uncertainty, though, because he's been phenomenal at multiple stops. He can play a bunch of other positions, too. It kind of could fit in wherever they need somebody, even if it's a brief return to AAA to start the year.
He has a 266 2020 projection.
For pick 300 or later. Yeah, I mean, the thing that's going to happen with Campbell as we get into spring training, if there's the helium around him and reports that everything's going great, second base could become his, like the more that happens, the more he mashes in the Grapefruit League, the more the price goes up. So this could be a winter special in terms of getting this sort of bargain, and it could be pick 200 or earlier by the time we get to March. That's entirely possible with a player like Christian Campbell. I'm with you on the Hamilton bench thing. I don't think he's that important. And Caleb Durbin comes up here because he has second base eligibility. The Brewers have a spot at third base. It feels
right-handed.
It feels like
he could be the platoon partner for Turang.
It could be that, or if they like him, he could play the way Ortiz played last year. Like, there's a few ways it could work. I just don't think he's a player I have to have right now. I think it's more of a wait and see because it's such a crowded situation. And you mentioned Christian Moore earlier. We know the Angels want to move prospects fast.
That's an actual prospect, and he was hitting tanks.
Yeah. Shit, it's such a small sample size.
Yeah.
Because they move guys so fast. But some of that's just kind of like, where does he belong? Like, at what level is he being challenged? At what level will he start to learn something? I think that's
you're coming out of
smart
Tennessee,
question,
dude. Like you
come out of SEC, play high quality competition in college. It's like, okay, what's appropriate for him? Double A seemed very appropriate, and he handled it well. So yeah,
I wonder if that's an actual project for anybody out there that might be interesting. What is the SEC if it was in the minor leagues?
Yeah, what level would it be?
Yeah.
If I had to guess, I would just say it would come out to something between high A and double A.
Yeah.
A little better than high A, not quite as good as double A would be my best guess. But I bet there are a bunch of people that have a better answer that are screaming right now in their cars and in their homes, like, no, DVR, it's not quite that good. You're overshooting it. There's just some really good players that come out of college that can handle double A right away.
Like you should think, like they now have pitching labs like major league teams do. You know, they're also poaching guys. Max Wiener, Texas A&M, got poached. You know, they're paying him better than he was paid with the Mariners.
Speaking of the Mariners, last name I'm going to throw at you because we're just about out of time for today. I kind of like Ryan Bliss. I think he's the sort of player that on a team that doesn't always spend money when it should, I think Ryan Bliss might be kind of good. Nice OBPs in the minors, has some speed, has a lot of speed, has some power, super, super late. I mean, this is like after pick 400 at the earliest, ADP's in the 700 range, so he goes undrafted sometimes. I don't know, man. Ryan Bliss has spent a full year at AAA, basically split over 2 seasons, and he's hit 22 homers with 70 steals and like a 370 OBP at Tacoma. I know it's the PCL, but
it's PCL. Like if you combine those years, he's basically league average.
And who's playing second base there?
Yeah,
that's my reasoning. Super deep
also
leagues.
Got Trader Jerry.
Yeah, he's been quiet. I don't know what's going on with Trader Jerry.
He also one thing I noticed when I was looking at this, because it did come up when I did the biggest holes piece. The Mariners were on it for first, second, third, and DH, which I was like, great. Wow, you're doing really well in the other places if you're still a contender.
Right? Yeah, your outfield and your pitching looks good.
Cole Young came up. And Cole Young is younger and was a shortstop, and I believe his OBP skills more than Bliss. Bliss, if you believe in the power, that might be a separator. Also, Bliss is maybe closer, but Cole Young spent 552 plate appearances in Double-A last year with a 119 WRC plus. Might be a better defender. Yeah, base more. I mean, it's just my point is he's got competition even among the like young players that could play.
They got multiple spots that you just outlined though, so I'm not worried about the competition. Right. They have several vacancies, so let's keep that light on. Let's see if that's a possibility. But more position previews to come. We move to the corners for our next 2. We'll start at third base with our episode on Wednesday. Thanks to everybody who made it all the way through this episode. Be sure to smash the like button on this video if you're still here and watching us on YouTube. Tell a friend. It's a great time to jump in on the pod as we move through this series over the next couple of weeks. Be sure to join our Discord with the link in the show description. Give us a follow on Blue Sky. Eno is enosaris.bsky.social. I am dvr.bsky.social. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.